Stop. That's it. Come on, it's gone too far.
It has gone too far. I have an obligation to be in that room. I represent 200,000 people in Northwest Georgia who duly elected me to be here today.
Welcome to A Gentleman's Review. I'm Art Hampton. I'm your host, bringing you the news that the mainstream propaganda does not address. And today, we're on the cusp of an awesome story. We have is it the chairman of the GR? Are you the chairman?
President.
President
Alex Johnson is the chairman.
Okay, we'll have him on here next. We have the
Yes.
chairman of the Georgia Republican Assembly and a good friend of mine, Nathaniel Darnell, and he's here to talk about some things that happened in recent history and some things that happened to a good member of the John Birch Society, Colton Moore. And I don't know if you've heard what happens. We got the clip, and we're going to play it so you can see what really took place on the ground. So, Nathaniel, tell us a little bit about, to the viewers that don't know what's happening in Georgia, tell us how has tyranny ensued and what took place.
Well, thank you, Arthur, for having me on your program. Really appreciate you and the John Birch Society. The Republican Assembly is always pleased to be able to partner with the John Birch Society on lots of great efforts to hold tyrants accountable. And we definitely had a terrible example of tyranny on display at the Capitol in the Gold Dome in Atlanta the other day, where Senator Colton Moore, who's a GRA-endorsed state senator who we're very proud to help to get elected to office. I personally door knocked for him. I count him a personal friend of mine. He has the best voting record of any Republican in the state legislature, and he's been willing to call out rhinos on a lot of different subjects. But what happened on just a couple of days ago at the state capitol is the governor was going to have a joint session before both the House and the Senate at the state legislature. This happens every year, just like the President of the United States has the State of the Union address, the governor has the State of the State address. And so both houses are invited to come to the House chamber. And so Colton was simply exercising his constitutional right, his constitutional duty to attend that meeting. He was invited to it. There was a resolution saying all members of both the House and the Senate should come to this joint meeting. And so he came just like every other state legislator, but when he went to enter the chamber for the House, he was met with resistance by the doorkeeper, specifically two members of the staff for Speaker John Burns. We had a deputy chief of staff who grabbed Colton as he was trying to go into the door and pulled him away from the door and threw him on the ground, and did this as state patrolmen stood by idly and said and did nothing. And it was shocking. Colton was very restrained given the circumstances. I think they were trying to provoke him to try to get into a tussle with this guy and swing back and be more aggressive than he was. But Colton showed an amazing restraint given how disrespectfully he was handled and treated. I mean, what happened, he was assaulted and battered. He has cause of action against this deputy chief of staff. And this deputy chief of staff ought to know better because he's passed the California State Bar. He's an attorney himself. He's listed not only as a deputy chief of staff for Speaker John Burns, he's also listed as a general counsel. So it'd be one thing if a regular person did that, but for someone who knows the law, knows that what he did was assault and battery, and was unconstitutional because the Constitution specifically says that senators have the right to travel to and from, and that they're free from arrest in all their duties during the legislative session. But what happened was not only was Colton battered and assaulted in front of these state patrolmen, but when Colton got up and insisted that he had a duty and a right to come into the chamber, instead of arresting the guy who assaulted him, the state patrolmen arrested Colton. And then they walked him to a police car and took him to the same Fulton County jail where Fannie Willis booked Donald Trump last year and got the famous mugshot. And so now Colton has a famous mugshot in the exact same place where Donald Trump was prosecuted wrongfully several months ago. So it was a terrible thing, and we're very upset. A lot of people wrote letters, made phone calls to their state legislators, saying this is terrible. We need to do something about this. Many people were calling for John Burns to to resign, to be removed from office, for there to be a recall. And then yesterday morning, in the state legislature at the state senate, Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones made a speech in which he apologized to Colton for the incident and expressed that it would never happen again under his watch as lieutenant governor. He also said he had a phone call with Speaker Burns in which they had some type of agreement that, the speaker would be responsible for people in his chamber, lieutenant governor would be responsible for people in his chamber, and that this wouldn't happen again.
But why didn't Burt Jones stand up for him that day? It seems kind of a little late to come back the day after and say all this stuff. That sounds to me kind of like controlled opposition. And that's just my assessment.
That's a question. Well, that's a question a lot of people are asking. Yes, we're grateful that Burt Jones is coming out supporting Senator Moore. That's better than the Speaker's office has been willing to acknowledge so far. Also, George GOP Chairman Josh McCoon has come out saying that what happened was awful, and we appreciate those statements. Again, much better than what John Burns' office has been willing to admit at this point. But a lot of it does seem like it was watered down, and it was late. We had some other people that spoke in protest yesterday, but it was a lot of people are saying it's a day late and a dollar short. The appropriate thing would have been for Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones to have stopped the proceedings yesterday and said, "Hold it! Why are you not letting my senator into the chamber?" Any of the different constitutional officers could have called for a point of order in the session yesterday and said, "Hold it! Why are y'all not letting Senator Moore into the chamber?" And only one of them did, which was very shocking, very shocking. So, I mean, some people say that this took them off guard. They just didn't expect it. There's never been a display like this that's happened at the state capitol. So some of them said, well, I would have done something, but I just didn't know what to do. It took me completely by surprise. But I think right now people have learned that these tyrants, they will do anything they think they want to do. It doesn't matter if it's inconsistent with the law. And what led up to this, was also kind of petty and tyrannical. What started all this, you may recall, was last session, which there was an election prior to this recent session that we're in now. Last year, there was a resolution put forward to honor the late Speaker David Ralston, and they're naming a campus after him. There was a painting put up in the Capitol, which they never do paintings for late speakers. That's something they do usually just for governors and people like Martin Luther King Jr. But they put up a special oil painting and all this pomp and circumstance for him, like he was a great and honorable man. And the truth is that Speaker David Ralston was a terrible person. He was a very corrupt politician. We at the GRA have cataloged all of his misdeeds over the years. And I know Colton had got up on the well to address the fact that this is not a man that should be put on a pedestal, to be emulated and treated as if he should be imitated by other politicians. He was a corrupt person. And before Colton could barely, finish addressing his concerns, he was booed at. He was told to get down from the well because of some kind of lack of decorum. I don't know how it's a lack of decorum to discuss a resolution that's being before the body like that. He wasn't mean. He didn't cuss out David Ralston. He didn't say anything that was unnecessary. He simply addressed the fact that Ralston has a long track record of corruption, both as a speaker and as an attorney who abused his office. And I could catalog for you many of the things he did, but that might take us down a bunny trail. But all that being said, even if you disagree with David Ralston being a good guy or a bad guy, even if you don't think that was appropriate, Speaker Burns' reaction to that was to say, I'm unilaterally banning Senator Moore from the House chamber indefinitely. Okay, so he said that a year ago, and now we're in a new legislative term. and he's still insisting on following through with that ban. Well, it's one thing maybe if he wants to do that when it's just the House in session. But when we have a joint session between both the Senate and the House, the Speaker has no authority whatsoever to prohibit senators from coming into the House chamber for a joint session. And the United States, or excuse me, the Georgia Constitution is very explicit in saying that he can't do that. In fact, senators cannot be arrested in conducting those types of things. So what's really odd, and I'll let you kind of tell me your thoughts about what happened here, is that not only was he charged, but those charges have not been dropped yet. Speaker Burns did finally release a statement yesterday saying, they regret what happened, but they did not apologize for it. They didn't take any responsibility for what happened. They blamed what happened on Colton and somehow suggested that he was misbehaving. They praised the doorkeepers. They praised the state patrolmen for doing what was quote unquote necessary in those circumstances. And then they went on to praise the Ralston family because supposedly the Ralston family was so gracious that they were willing to let Colton come back into the chamber for a joint session, even though he hadn't apologized to them, which is absurd. He has a constitutional right, and really it's the Speaker that should be apologizing to Colton. And so I think that Colton not only should have the charges dropped against him, but he also should pursue legal challenges against the Speaker's staff and the Speaker himself and others that were a party to this misconduct and this unconstitutional display of tyranny.
So there's three things I took from that. First of all, when I read what Burns put out, it was basically apologize or I'm not going to lift the ban. That's pretty childish. You need to apologize to me.
It's bullying.
It's basic bullying. It's like kindergarten tactics of bullying.
Mm-hmm.
You need to apologize before you can do
Right.
your job. Before you
It's
can
cancel culture. We talked about how awful that was when it was put on display by the social media companies like X, Twitter, Facebook, etc. But here it is, the government doing it, and you're saying people aren't allowed to have dissenting opinions on subjects that are being discussed in the legislature. I mean, people disagree all the time. What else are we going to bully people over if they don't agree with us?
Well, and I forgot who said this. Was it Elon Musk that said this? The First Amendment is not there for what you agree with. The First Amendment is there so that you can have people that disagree with you. And I think Ron Paul said something similar. The First Amendment's not there so we can talk about the weather. It's to allow them to say what they want to say, even though they disagree with you or say something, I guess in some cases that some people consider vulgar. But the second thing that I would say that took place is Colton's district was not represented at that meeting at the State House. So that's basically taxation without representation. Didn't we fight a war for that?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't just a violation of Colton's rights. It was a violation of every constituent that he represents. And he represents a district that has over 500,000 people living in it, over 200,000 voters. And that's a huge disenfranchisement. I mean, there's also a call by some to pursue a class action lawsuit by those voters, those constituents, against the Speaker and against the government that was privy to these actions. And it was a terrible display of injustice, and there's things we need to do to correct it. The pressure needs to continue to be on for the Speaker to apologize, and if necessary, he needs to be sanctioned. But I also want to focus on the positive things that we see coming from this, because 20 years ago, I worked with another great state legislator here in Georgia named Bobby Franklin, and you may remember Bobby. I think he was also supported by the John Birch Society. Bobby took very strong positions as well, and he was often standing alone in the legislature. The difference, though, was that back then, Bobby didn't have this huge support base of different organizations to draw attention to these misdeeds when they occurred. And what's unique is that now we have so many great organizations that are willing to point out when things like this happen, to draw attention to it. The GRA, John Birch Society, other groups like Georgians for Truth are putting out the word about this and drawing attention to the grassroots. And it created a huge outcry. And then when this hit the news, and it hit the news nationwide, people are like, what is going on in Georgia? This sounds awful. It's Republicans against Republicans, and it's really just symptomatic of an issue that we at the GRA, and I think you guys in the John Birch Society have often been wanting to point out, is ongoing. This is not a one-off. It's not a something that's odd and happened out of the blue and it's unusual. No, this is actually something that goes on regularly in the state legislature. The reason why the GRA exists is because we have a huge epidemic of rhinos in the state capitol that are violating their oaths of office. They're violating the Republican Party platform that they ran on. They're violating their campaign promises, and they're not promoting the values of the Republican Party that they say they hold to. And Colton has been calling it out for years, and he called out the legislators who would not support constitutional carry for years and years before it was finally passed. He's been calling out the folks who are supporting the violation of our state constitution when it comes to not having a true balanced budget. They say we have a balanced budget, but we keep issuing bonds, which is technically not a balanced budget. That's like me, taking out a credit card and saying that I am balancing my budget with more debt. Colton has taken lots of other stands. He's helping to support the election integrity effort. There's countless ways in which he has exposed the hypocrisy by his positive example. And I'm really excited that we now have groups that are working together to showcase a hero in action and also be able to expose the tyranny even within the Republican Party when it happens. So in some ways, that's a good thing. That's a sign of making progress for the grassroots. I'm glad that Colton has the support that Bobby didn't have 20 years ago. And I think that means that we're going to be able to turn some of the momentum around against the tyranny here in our state.
And it was a statement that Matt Truella made when he came down and spoke in Georgia and South Carolina. He said, when you oppose tyrants, there's two things a tyrant can do. One, he can recoil back into his lair, or he can lash out, and then everybody sees him for the tyrant, the beast that he is. And here we see them lashing out so that everybody can see the tyranny and what's really going on. And I hope we can get some momentum here. Don't let a good tragedy go to waste, and get some momentum here to overturn the tyranny that is taking place here in Georgia. And here in the South, and I'm over several different states in the John Birch Society, from South Carolina all the way to Texas. And it's the same thing. You see the same thing happening. Maybe not to this extreme, but the same thing happening in all the states. Because in the South here, in the Bible Belt, supposedly, everybody's a Christian, everybody's conservative, everybody's Republican for the most part. And the liberals know that, so they just run on the Republican ticket. All you got to do is talk conservative, and then when you get to the state house, vote however you want to vote, despite the Constitution that you swore an oath to, despite the party platform. And by the way, we need to do a whole episode on just the party platform. I think you have a great speech on that, and I want to get the word out in other states on that. But showing the tyranny that's going on and then standing up against this. I just got back from Appleton, Wisconsin, and I was like, oh my goodness, what is going on in Georgia? I leave the South for like 3 days and all this craziness is going on. But showing what's really happening and seeing the people stand up against tyranny, we need to keep this wave moving. And I've actually developed a speech when Trump got elected. I knew it was going to happen. Don't fall asleep in the second half. And this is part of it. Don't fall asleep in the second half. People say, oh, we got the House, we got the Senate, we got the White House, Trump's elected. Oh, we're good. Well, you're good for how long? Trump ain't even elected. Trump ain't even swore in yet, and this tyranny is taking place. We don't need to fall asleep, because if you fall asleep in the second half, you get beat. And I know in Georgia there, it seems like everybody's a Bulldog fan, so I figured using a football reference would be people would be able to relate to it. I'm here in South Carolina, so we're Gamecock fans, and so that's a little different there. But the other thing is,
I'll tell you, you're hitting on something that really is top of mind for a lot of people, because once again, Republicans have a trifecta in D.C. We have control of the White House. We have control of the Senate. We have control of the House of Representatives. And we had that, a few years ago, back when Trump got elected initially. We had a trifecta in 2016 that lasted about 2 years. And in that 2 year period, we could have overturned a lot of the terrible things that Obama had instituted. And a lot of Republicans ran on a platform of, overturning Obamacare and a lot of the other bad things that Obama had done. But we wasted those 2 years because people were so afraid of, Republicans are going to lose power. We're not going to get reelected if we, are too aggressive. And what happened? We
lost power anyway. Yeah.
We lost anyway. Republicans, time and time again, what happened in the Bush years. We had 6 years under George W. Bush where we had a trifecta of all houses in D.C., and we wasted the opportunity then as well. See, now people will say, rhinos and establishment folks will say, Republican Party, what we really need to do is we need to win more elections. And when I look back over the 40 years of the last 40 years in politics, I see that we've won, at least 50%, more than 50% of the elections. The problem is not that we're not winning elections. We've won the presidency more than half of the time of the last 40 years. We've won the Senate more than half the time of the last 40 years, close to the same number of percentage in the House and the Senate. But it's not that we're not winning elections, it's that we're not advancing the platform, the values, the policies that we say we believe in. The Democrats are. They're advancing their agenda. I mean, if anybody looks at our culture and our political system over the last 40 years, they see that we have moved further and further to the left, or further and further into statism and tyranny. How is it that the Democrats are able to force their radical agenda with winning about, as many elections as we have won, or fewer, a little bit fewer? And I think it's because when they are in power, they go for broke. We saw that, for example, in 2008 when Obama first got elected and he had both houses of Congress on his side and they rammed through Obamacare. They knew it was terrible. They knew it was awful. It was radical. But they said, we don't care. We're going for broke. We're going to get as much bad stuff as we can get done. And so let's take full advantage of the time before we're kicked out of office. We saw it again now with Joe Biden over the last 4 years and the Senate and the Democrat-controlled House, how they pushed a radical agenda, and it was overwhelming. Excuse me, I'm getting choked up about this.
Well, that just goes to show, and I know you're an attorney, so you know all about Sir William Blackstone. Blackstone made a statement. He said, "The law is the embodiment of the moral sediment of the people."
Right.
And I'll say it again. The law is the embodiment of the moral sediment of the people. And so, and that's kind of the what the John Birch Society is doing, is we are educating to change the moral sediment of the people. You're not going to have a political solution per se unless you change the moral sediment of the people. And people go, "Oh, we need term limits. We need this." But here's the thing. Do you know who Bob Kaufman is? Most people don't know who he is.
Tell me more about Bob Kaufman.
Bob Kaufman is the reason why I emphasize the long-term game. If you get somebody in there that's conservative, that's the short-term game. We got to get people elected, okay? That's very short-sighted. If you're getting people elected that have an R next to their name and they're a rhino, that's no different than getting someone on the Democratic side elected. The only difference
is... Actually,
I'd
argue it's even worse.
It's worse because go ahead.
Because they ought to know better, and because we're taking Republican resources and using them to move Democrat policies and advance them instead of Republican policies. That's worse.
Well, it's a worse.
That's like being in a war. That's like being in a war where you're shooting bullets at your own soldiers.
Yes.
That's worse than guys in the other side shooting at me. I expect that. But if you're shooting at guys in the same lines as you, that you're a unique type of lowlife.
Yeah, that's fratricide. And not only that, but it's a wolf in sheep's clothing, to use a biblical reference. Right. They talk conservative, but at least with the liberal Democrat, you know where you stand. At least they're honest. At least they're honest. But yeah. I tell people this, and I spoke to some GOP chairmen in Georgia. We just got to get people elected. I said, if you're getting people elected that do not stand on the party platform, that did not stand for the Constitution, that aren't Christians, you're part of the problem. You're part of the problem. Why don't you just help the
Yep.
Democrats get people elected? I mean, that'd be a lot easier in most cases. It's not we just need to get people elected. It's we need to change the moral sentiment of the people. And that's a hard sell sometimes because you don't see the results up front. It's the long-term game,
Right.
but it has long-term results. If you just get people elected, when they get out of office, that it's a temporary solution. Trump's got 4 years. Okay, who's going to be president next? Nancy Pelosi,
Right.
Gavin Newsom. You don't know who that's going to be. But if you focus on the long-term solution, and we can hold these people in check with the proper checks and balances, we can hold whoever president. You could have Hitler as president, and if Congress is doing what they're supposed to be doing and stopping the tyranny that they're implementing, you could have Hitler as president, and it wouldn't make that much of a difference because they're supposed to be very limited in power. Just
Right.
like
They should be held in check.
absolutely, just like bump stocks. I'll use that as an example. Trump signed away bump stocks. It's one of the things that I disagree with him that he did.
Right.
And Congress said, no, that's a violation of the Second Amendment. We're going to undo that. That's what needs to be happen. And why they did that with Trump and then didn't do it with Biden, it just baffles me. Completely baffles me.
Yeah, I believe the Supreme Court of the United States overturned that bump stock.
Was
decision.
it the Supreme Court? Okay. So,
Yeah.
excuse me. I'm
But yeah, but it was right. That was something that President Trump was wrong on, and I'm glad the United States Supreme Court, a lot of those justices were ones that he appointed, but they still said that was an unconstitutional piece of legislation, and I'm glad they held him accountable in that particular way. But you're hitting on a lot of great things. I'm glad that we have people like Senator Colton Moore that are drawing attention to the corruption in politics and even within the Republican Party apparatus. And the GRA is definitely about trying to expose the corruption. We're going to continue to speak out and expose corruption just as Colton Moore is. And we're calling on other people that want to see the corruption exposed, like the John Birch Society, to reach out and work with us. Maybe people here in Georgia will want to join the GRA as a member. You can do that at georgiara.com. And one of the ways that we do that is we have endorsement conventions, both for candidates that are running for political office as well as within the party. We're going to be having conventions over the next few months where we're going to be electing new leaders for the Georgia Republican Party through those conventions at the county level, at the congressional district level, and at the state level. And folks can get involved and they can help us get better people like Colton elected to office by getting better leaders at the state party and the county party elected as well. People who believe in accountability, people who believe in actually promoting the platform and the policies that are outlined in the platform, rather than just being yes men to the politicians. That is what we are told, is that the party people, the activists, are just supposed to be cheerleaders for the folks at the Gold Dome, and we're not supposed to actually speak up and contradict what's going on at the Capitol. We're just supposed to make those guys look good. No, we're supposed to make sure that we are, that as the Bible says, judgment begins in the house of God. And just as fellow Christians need to hold each other accountable so that our testimony is right in a watching world, Republicans need to be holding Republicans accountable so that we cannot be accused of being hypocrites and have our credibility destroyed as we're trying to answer the problems that are so very top of mind in the United States right now. So I hope that people will get involved through the GRA and through the John Birch Society and other great groups that we partner with. Voter GA is another great group that's helping to promote election integrity here in Georgia. They did an interview with Colton Moore's chief of staff earlier today, which was excellent. They've been supporting Colton, and we have a lot of other great groups. So I hope that folks will engage and activate, because there's a lot of good reasons to be excited, even though we see some flagrant displays of tyranny. I honestly think that the folks at the Capitol did not expect that Colton would do this. I think they thought they were going to intimidate him, that he would back off, just like in Catoosa County, where we have these leaders of the Catoosa GOP that blocked to qualify some bad rhino candidates, and the judge thought he could intimidate them by saying he was going to charge them $1,000 an hour fines for every hour they refused to qualify these rhinos, and then he threatened them with jail time, and then they didn't back off. These establishment people are just not accustomed to having people be so bold and courageous. And so when they are, it's such a shock. It throws them off. They do stupid things like, get videos captured nationwide of the speakers deputy chief of staff assaulting a state senator. I mean, that is such a bad look. I really think it's in part because they just did not expect that our side would have the guts and the courage and the integrity to follow through and do the brave thing. And in some ways, that is a wonderful reason to be excited about the time we're living in. This should not be an extraordinary thing that Colton did. This should be a normal thing. Other patriots, other activists should be just as brave and just as bold and be just as courageous to be willing to oppose tyranny as Colton did earlier this week. And I hope this becomes a normative behavior characteristic with the patriot cause that we're seeing.
Well, excellent. I'd like to continue this conversation, so come back next time for part 2 of an interview with Nathaniel Darnell, the president of the GRA, because we're out of time. And thanks for tuning in. This has been a Gentleman's Review, bringing you the news that the mainstream propaganda does not. And like I said, tune in next time for part 2 of this. Thanks, and please like, share, and subscribe.